He fired me at 9:13 a.m. on a Wednesday. Not with drama, not with shouting, just a smug smirk and the kind of corporate coldness that dripped with entitlement. "You're just not aligned with the new direction," he said, sliding a manila envelope across the polished conference table like he was dealing a poker hand. "Clean out your desk by noon. HR's been notified." I didn't say anything at first. Just sat there in my navy button-down, sipping coffee like it was any other day, because I knew something he didn't. Something that made this entire ambush not humiliating, but hilarious. He had no idea who I was. My name is Daniel Cross. I've worked at Virion Dynamics, a mid-sized tech firm in Austin, for just over 7 years. Long enough to see CEOs cycle through, watch departments rise and fall, and survive 2 major acquisitions. I ran data infrastructure quietly, effectively. I didn't talk much in meetings. Never gunned for credit. I just got things done. My division was the backbone of the company's operational intelligence. I built it from scratch. But here's what no one knew, especially not the man sitting across from me that morning in his $1,200 tailored jacket and shiny Stanford ring. I own the company. Not all of it, but enough to matter. 51% of it, to be exact. Acquired silently during a down year, when the board was desperate for cash and I had an inheritance burning a hole in a trust account. I didn't do it for power. I did it because I believed in what we were building. And I did it quietly, through a shell LLC based in Delaware, through lawyers bound by ironclad NDAs. No one knew the truth, not even my team. But I guess Nathan Sloan, our new COO, thought it was his time to play king. He'd only been with us 3 months, and in that time he'd gutted our admin staff, restructured 3 entire departments, and driven out 2 of our most experienced VPs. All in the name of leaner operational flow. He talked like a TED Talk and walked like he owned the building. But he didn't. I did. And now he just fired me. I leaned back in the chair, took another sip of coffee, and smiled. Not big, just enough to make him uncomfortable. "I don't think you understand the risk you just took," I said, voice steady. Nathan frowned, clearly irritated that I wasn't folding like he expected. "You're not in a position to talk risk, Daniel. Your department's output has stagnated. Innovation's been flat. There's no passion in your leadership. Is that your opinion?" I asked. "Or did the interns write that for you?" His face flushed just slightly. "Look," he snapped, "I'm being generous. I could have just walked you out. I'm offering you a clean break. Fire me officially," I said, folding my arms. "Right now. Call HR and make it formal." The room went still. His confidence hiccuped. He hadn't expected defiance, not from the quiet guy in analytics. He expected me to thank him for the severance and sneak out with my tail tucked between my legs. But that's the thing about silent people. You never hear us coming. And when we strike, it's already too late. I stood calmly, picking up the envelope like it was junk mail. Then I smiled wider than I had in months. "This is going to be one hell of a board meeting," I said, and walked out. The hallway outside the executive suite was quiet, but not in the peaceful way. It was the kind of silence that crackled with tension, like the moment before a thunderclap. People glanced up from their desks, eyes flicking toward me, then quickly away, pretending they hadn't seen anything. Word travels fast in companies like Virion. I didn't storm out. I didn't call HR or slam a door. I just walked slow, steady calm. The kind of calm that rattles people more than any outburst. I stopped by my office long enough to grab the black leather folder that never left my bottom drawer. It held the documents, ownership structure, voting rights, investor notes. All the leverage I'd never used until now. Nathan Sloan had just declared war, and I was going to let him walk right into his own ambush. By noon, the entire 10th floor was buzzing. Nobody said it out loud, but you could feel it. Movement, glances, HR reps walking past with that neutral we-know-nothing face. Nathan wanted this to look like a routine transition. Another performance improvement cut in the name of optimization. But what he didn't know was that the documents he'd submitted to the board the day before, proposing a new agile leadership structure, still listed the required signature of majority shareholder approval as pending. He assumed it was someone in New York, or some faceless investment group. He didn't know it was me, and I had no intention of stopping him. Not yet. I headed straight to legal. Michelle Ortega, head of compliance, had been with Virion almost as long as I had. Sharp. No nonsense. The kind of person who always read the fine print twice. She was the only person I'd ever hinted the truth to. She looked up from her desk the moment I walked in. Her eyes narrowed. "Tell me he didn't," she said, before I even sat down. I pulled out the folder and slid it toward her. "He did." She opened it, scanned the top page, and blew out a slow whistle. "Jesus. He really doesn't know, does he?" "Nope." Michelle leaned back, tapping a pen against her lip. "He's trying to restructure you out before Monday's board session, and he thinks it'll go through clean. Let him think that. You're not going to stop it. I want him to think he's winning. I want him confident, loud, arrogant." Michelle tilted her head. "You're baiting him. I'm setting the stage." There was a beat of silence. Then she nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll make sure this version of the restructure doc is forwarded to the board, unaltered. Let's let him walk into it." "Thanks. And Daniel," she added, voice lowering, "do you want to come clean to the board ahead of time?" I shook my head. "No, not yet. I want them to hear it when he's in the room." She smiled just a little. "You've been patient for years. This will be satisfying." "It's not about satisfaction," I said, standing. "It's about showing people who's really in control when it matters most." That afternoon, I walked the building like a ghost. Meetings passed without me. Emails poured in. Nathan's assistant sent out a company-wide update about realigning priorities. He was already acting like he'd won. And in a way, he had for now. But behind the scenes, the whispers had begun. People noticed I didn't clear out my office, that I hadn't sent a farewell email, that I walked through the lobby without security escorting me. People noticed I looked calm. By the end of the day, Michelle texted me. "Board meeting confirmed Monday, 8 a.m. chairman included. Sloan's proposal is last on the agenda. See you then." Perfect. I closed my laptop, placed the leather folder back in my drawer, and turned off the lights. The trap was set, and in 5 days, I'd pull the pin. Monday arrived with the chill of early winter still clinging to the Austin skyline. The kind of morning where the air felt just sharp enough to make you pay attention. I dressed deliberately. Nothing flashy. Crisp black blazer. Open-collared white shirt. No tie. Calm. In control. Not a man begging to be heard, but a man who no longer needed to raise his voice. I arrived at the Virion boardroom 5 minutes early, leather folder in hand. The room was still half empty. Long glass table. Espresso bar in the corner. Floor-to-ceiling windows glowing with the morning sun. Michelle was already seated near the center, eyes scanning her tablet. She looked up and gave me a subtle nod. Then Nathan Sloan walked in, 10 seconds late, grinning like a man who'd already won. "Morning," he said, voice smooth as ever, like he hadn't tried to end my career 4 days earlier. "Glad to see you could join us, Daniel." I gave him a nod, but said nothing. He didn't know this wasn't his stage. The board trickled in. Chairman Wallace, CFO Grant Reynolds, the company's outside legal counsel, and 2 investment reps from the East Coast. As usual, I took my seat near the end of the table. Not out of habit, but strategy. Let him have the head of the table. Let him think he's running the show. Wallace called the meeting to order, and the first 30 minutes were boilerplate, quarterly earnings, growth projections, supply chain adjustments. Then came the final item on the agenda, leadership restructure proposal. Nathan stood like he'd been rehearsing it for weeks. Buttoned his jacket, clicked the remote. The screen behind him lit up with buzzwords, agility, streamlining, vision. "Thank you all," he began, voice dripping with confidence. "As part of our effort to align Virion with scalable growth models, I've outlined a leaner structure centered around operational velocity and leadership clarity." He flipped through slides of org charts, trim divisions, realignment strategies, all designed to look progressive, bold, necessary. Then came the dagger. In closing, he said, voice as steady as ever, "I propose that we transition Daniel Cross from head of data infrastructure to a contracted advisory role. His functions will be redistributed among a newly formed junior analytics pod. The move reflects our evolving focus on agility and digital transformation." He didn't look at me. Not once. The room was quiet until Chairman Wallace cleared his throat. "Jacob," he said, We still need final shareholder approval to execute this change. I see your materials listed as pending. Has that been resolved? Nathan gave the slightest shrug. I assumed it was procedural. No objections were expected. I leaned forward, calm as a surgeon. I object. Every head turned. Nathan blinked. Excuse me? I'm afraid I can't approve this proposal, I said, pulling the leather folder from my briefcase. As majority shareholder of Virion Dynamics, I do not consent to any structural change affecting my position or my division. He stared at me, stunned. What are you talking about? I slid the documents across the table, signed, notarized, binding. Michelle leaned forward and nodded. It's been verified, she said. Daniel owns 51% of the company through Crossbridge Holdings. This isn't new. It's been on file since the 2020 capital infusion. Silence. Real silence. The kind that feels like an earthquake holding its breath. Nathan's mouth opened, then closed. His cheeks flushed red, his stance faltering. You're joking, he finally muttered. I'm not, I replied. But you are. If you thought you could walk in here, fire me, restructure the company, and never once check who actually owns it. The board sat frozen. Wallace rubbed his temples. Grant leaned back, expression unreadable. Michelle, for once, let the corners of her mouth curve into a grin. Nathan fumbled, papers in hand. You can't. Why didn't anyone tell me? I stared at him, not with anger, but something colder. Precision. Because you never asked. You assumed. You saw quiet and thought weakness. You saw humility and thought irrelevance. But this whole time, you were talking about streamlining a man who signs your paychecks. He stepped back, grasping at air, like someone realizing the ground beneath them had just disappeared. Wallace stood, voice low. We'll take a short recess. Nathan remained seated. Daniel, if you would stay as well. As the rest of the board exited in silence, I leaned back in my chair, folder closed, hands folded. Nathan sat stiffly across from me, eyes wide with the shock of a man who just found out the castle he built was made of glass. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to, because in that moment, Nathan Sloan finally understood. The room didn't belong to him. It never did, and I was just getting started. After the boardroom emptied, the silence left behind wasn't peaceful. It was volatile. Nathan hadn't said a word as the others filed out. He just sat there, frozen in his chair, staring at the table like it had betrayed him. His hands were clenched, his jaw locked. The mask of confidence he wore now cracked down the middle. I didn't offer him comfort. I didn't offer a word. I just gathered my folder, tucked my pen back into my coat pocket, and left the room with the same calm I'd entered with. But I knew it wasn't over. Men like Nathan don't quit after one hit. They retreat, recalculate, and then they strike again. Not in public, but from the shadows. And sure enough, the next move came 3 days later. It started with a meeting I didn't know I was removed from, an annual planning session with one of our biggest analytics clients, Vanguard Retail Group. I prepped for it all week. At 8:12 a.m., I received a calendar cancellation. This meeting has been reassigned to alternate leadership per executive direction. No explanation. No heads up. Just gone. By noon, 2 of my team leads emailed me, saying their access to a proprietary dashboard had been revoked. One we'd built in-house and used daily for performance reporting. IT traced the change to an anonymous, executive-level directive. Nathan's fingerprints were all over it. He wasn't trying to fire me anymore. He was trying to make me irrelevant. Inch by inch, piece by piece. The difference was, I'd seen this play before. Back in 2013, at a different company, I'd watched another young, sharp-suited executive do this exact thing to a woman named Beth Morgan, our head of corporate strategy. She was smart, competent, respected, and she was gradually isolated, taken off calls, excluded from briefs, her access accidentally revoked. Within 6 months, she left, exhausted and disillusioned. Nobody stopped it. Not even me. I was too junior then, too scared, but not anymore. Now I had power and a long memory, so I started documenting every canceled meeting, every revoked permission, every quiet, strategic exclusion. I logged them in a private file labeled Initiative Echo. I didn't talk. I didn't complain. I just gathered evidence. Then the messages started. Anonymous ones. Sent through the company's internal feedback portal. Thank you for what you did in the boardroom. People saw it. We were holding our breath. He cut my entire department and made it sound like I was the one who failed. You're the first person to ever push back. Please don't stop. Some of us are still here because you are. 12 came in the first week. 26 the next. Stories of teams gaslight, dismissed, overworked. Of abrupt firings. Of good people made to feel disposable. This wasn't just a personal vendetta anymore. It was systemic, cultural, toxic. I met Michelle for coffee that Friday. Not at the office. Off-site, at a tucked-away cafe just north of the river. Wood panel walls, vinyl booths, and zero chance of being overheard. I slid my phone across the table, displaying the internal messages. She read them without speaking. Then, he's not just retaliating. He's building a paper trail. One that paints you as disengaged, difficult, obsolete. I know, I said. And I want to respond, not react. Michelle nodded. Then document everything. Timestamps, screenshots, meeting logs. If this becomes a hostile work environment claim, we need a clean record. I've already started, I said, sipping my coffee. But we may need to go higher. She raised an eyebrow. HR. No. Board Ethics Committee. Off the record for now. A beat passed. Then she nodded again. I'll make the call. That night, back at the office, I stayed late. The floors were quiet. The city lights outside blinked against the windows. I walked the halls slowly, watching the empty desks, remembering what we'd built. What we'd saved. What I wasn't going to let him dismantle just to feed his ego. Because Nathan Sloan didn't just come for me. He came for everything I stood for. But now, I wasn't playing defense anymore. He'd made his second strike. And the next one would be mine. The email came in at 7:46 a.m. on a Wednesday. It looked ordinary. Subject line, Team Performance Review Alignment. But the moment I opened it, I knew exactly what it was. A weapon. The message was short, clinical, cold. Daniel Cross has demonstrated signs of disengagement over the past quarter. Absences from key meetings, a lack of collaboration with executive leadership, and performance stagnation raised concerns about his long-term fit with Virion's evolving culture. It was sent to Chairman Wallace, CC'd to 2 board members, and by what I can only assume was a catastrophic mistake or a passive-aggressive power play. It was also accidentally forwarded to me. The sender? Nathan Sloan. He didn't just want me gone. He wanted to erase me. The old-school tactic, corporate erasure through documentation. Create the absence, then report it. Deny access, cancel meetings, exclude quietly, then say, look, he's not involved. It was a narrative, a lie dressed in data. A character assassination written in corporate speak. But this time, he'd sent it to the wrong guy. Because I already had the file. Everything. Every cancellation. Every dashboard block. Every anonymous message. Every team member sidelined or silenced. I'd been preparing for this exact play. The trap Nathan didn't know he'd walked into was now about to close. That morning, I called a closed-door meeting with Michelle and Chairman Wallace. No assistance. No paper trail. Just truth. We met in Wallace's glass-walled office on the top floor, overlooking the skyline. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't posture. I simply laid it all out. My name has been deliberately undermined, I said. Not through performance issues, but by design. Here are the facts. I handed Wallace a hard copy of my file. Every document labeled. Every screenshot dated. Every pattern clear. Canceled client sessions. Revoked system access. Reassignments without cause. Anonymous reports from current employees. And then, Nathan's email. The one he sent about me. Wallace read it twice. His lips compressed into a tight, grim line. Michelle spoke first. We've confirmed through IT that most of these directives came from Nathan's office. HR has also logged at least 3 similar complaints about departmental isolation and pressure since he took over. None were ever escalated. Wallace looked up. You've handled this with remarkable discipline, Daniel. I didn't want revenge, I said. I wanted proof. He nodded slowly. You've got it. What happens now? There's a board ethics committee meeting next Tuesday, Wallace said. Nathan will be invited to present his leadership strategy and answer for these tactics. You'll be given the floor to speak as well. Will I be allowed to tell the full story? You won't just tell it, Wallace said. You'll own the room. That weekend, I didn't rest. I prepared like it was war. Because it was. I crafted a clean timeline. I printed every message, sanitized of names, but raw in truth. I outlined how manipulation had replaced leadership, how fear had replaced clarity, how ego had begun to rot the core of what Virion was supposed to be. And then I practiced, not a speech, a statement, not loud, not emotional, just irrefutable. Tuesday came, 8:59 a.m. Nathan walked into the boardroom wearing his power suit and his TED Talk smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes this time. He still thought this was theater, a formality. It wasn't. Chairman Wallace opened the session. Nathan, you've been invited here to address concerns regarding your leadership over the last 6 weeks. You'll speak first. Then Daniel will have the floor. Nathan straightened his tie and launched into his monologue. All polish, all spin. What we're dealing with, he said, is a culture of misalignment. Unfortunately, some individuals have resisted that alignment. Daniel Cross has been reluctant to engage with evolving priorities. His recent absence from client-facing work and failure to adapt to operational models has created tension. While I respect Daniel, I believe it's time we refocus on performance, not personality. He sat down, pleased. I didn't say anything at first. Then I stood, opened my folder, passed printed reports down both sides of the table. I'd like to correct a few things. And I did. Calmly, clearly, fact by fact. I listed 6 blocked meetings, 4 revoked data tools, 3 reassigned client calls, the email smear, the anonymous messages, the IT confirmations, the HR logs. Then I looked at every person at the table and said, this isn't misalignment. It's sabotage, and I'm not the only one who's felt it. I opened a second folder, anonymous reports, 12 of them, cross-department, verified, documented, patterns of exclusion, gaslighting, sudden restructuring, and intimidation. These aren't from 6 years ago, I said. They're from last week. Last night, the room went still. Nathan's face had lost all color. Wallace sat back. Nathan, do you have a response? This is one-sided, Nathan stammered. You can't take anonymous claims as fact. Michelle cut in. Calm. Cool. We've corroborated multiple events, Daniel cited. IT confirmed the access removals. HR cross-referenced the anonymous accounts with flagged issues. They match. This isn't isolated. Nathan's voice rose. This is a setup. You're letting him trap me. I raised my hand, steady. No, you trapped yourself when you underestimated the one person who wasn't afraid to fight quietly. Wallace stood. Nathan Sloan, you are hereby suspended effective immediately pending formal review. Security will escort you out following this meeting. Nathan stood, stunned. I built this. No, I said softly. You nearly destroyed it. He left without a word. The door clicked shut behind him. The boardroom exhaled. Wallace looked at me. You didn't just protect yourself, Daniel. You saved this company. But I didn't smile. Because this wasn't victory. It was just survival. There was no confetti. No corporate-wide email. No all-hands Zoom. No justice has been served banner hanging in the atrium. Nathan Sloan didn't get a send-off. He just disappeared. The board didn't mention him again. His office was cleared quietly. The email to staff framed it as a strategic leadership transition. HR didn't take questions. His assistant stopped coming in. His LinkedIn page stayed untouched, frozen in time. But the silence? The silence changed. Where it had once felt heavy, watchful, now it felt open. Light filtered through in unexpected places. Conversations in hallways turned back into laughter. Teams started to look up from their keyboards again. Virion hadn't been healed, but the bleeding had stopped, and now it was time to rebuild. The board asked me to stay on as Interim Executive Director of Strategic Operations, Nathan's old title. I accepted, but with a condition. I don't want the chair for show, I told Chairman Wallace. I want the authority to clean house. Not of people, but of policies. I want to start from the inside out. He didn't hesitate. Do what you need to do. So I began. No grand town hall. No dramatic reorgs. just real work. The first thing I did was schedule meetings with every department head, one by one, face to face. Not in the boardroom, not through assistants, but in their own spaces. I sat in old chairs. I listened without interrupting. I asked 3 questions. What was broken? What mattered to your team the most? What do you wish leadership actually understood? And I listened, really listened. Some people were cautious. Some cried. Some talked for 40 minutes straight without looking up. I took notes, not to audit, but to understand. Because I'd spent too many years watching leadership assume. I wasn't going to be that leader. Next, I reinstated access permissions Nathan had secretly stripped. Gave teams control over their own data tools again. Reopened shared dashboards. Canceled the micromanaging check-in surveys that had been designed to measure obedience, not performance. Then I created something new, the Integrity Channel, an internal platform where any employee could anonymously flag toxic behavior or ethical red flags, with an option to request follow-up if they wanted to identify themselves later. It wasn't about policing, it was about visibility. The very first message came from a name I didn't recognize. I'm not used to speaking up. I've been afraid for months. But when I saw you take the floor during that board meeting, I realized something. Silence doesn't keep you safe. It keeps you invisible. Thank you for being seen. So people like me might be too. That one stayed with me. More came after that. Not just problems, but ideas. Real ideas. People who'd been boxed out now found a window open. I made sure they were heard. I followed up. I gave credit where it was due. And slowly, something started to shift. People stopped waiting to be told what to do. They started taking ownership again. One afternoon, I visited the analytics floor, my old home base. I didn't send a memo. I didn't call a meeting. I just walked in. Half the room stood when they saw me. The rest froze like they didn't know whether to clap or salute. Don't stand, I said, smiling. I'm not a statue. Laughter. Real laughter. And one voice from the back, someone new I didn't recognize, called out. So, are we allowed to tell people you're actually the owner now? I paused and shrugged. Titles come and go, I said, but you all built this place. I just made sure we still had the keys. That night, I stayed later than usual. I walked past Nathan's old office. The nameplate was gone. The glass walls were still smudged with ghostly fingerprints. I stood there for a moment. Then I opened the door. Inside, it was sterile. Lifeless. The kind of space that had been used to make decisions from above, never beside. I left the light off. The next morning, a new nameplate was installed. Not mine. Just 3 words. Integrity is non-negotiable. No title. No ego. Just a promise. Because rebuilding a company doesn't start with policy. It starts with trust. And trust doesn't return with noise. It comes back quietly. One person at a time. 3 weeks after Nathan Sloan walked out of the boardroom with his career in a box, I finally thought things were stabilizing. But stability in business is a lie. A beautiful, temporary lie. And I've been in the game long enough to know that when things go quiet, really quiet, it means something's lurking beneath the surface. It started with a spreadsheet. Late one Tuesday, I was reviewing legacy contracts, stuff buried deep in the finance archives that Nathan's streamlining had conveniently deprioritized. That's when I noticed it, a billing discrepancy in our vendor payouts. Minor at first glance, $4, $600 over on a Q2 disbursement to an outside consulting firm based out of Delaware. I flagged it for curiosity, not alarm. 2 days later, I found another. Different vendor. Similar pattern. Rounded invoice totals. Paid through a secondary approval chain. The common link? Both approvals were signed off during Nathan's first 90 days. And both used a rarely accessed executive override protocol. Normally, that function required 2 signatures, COO and CFO. But in both instances, the second signature was marked as delegated authority, temporary. That's not just a red flag. That's an entire parade. I called Grant Reynolds, our CFO, into a late meeting on Friday. He walked in like a man who hadn't slept much lately. Top button undone, sleeves rolled. I think we've got a problem, I said, handing him the packet I'd prepared. He read through the first 2 pages in silence. Then, I never signed off on these. Exactly, I replied. But someone did, with your delegated stamp. Who the hell would do that? We both already knew the answer, but saying it out loud meant starting a war we hadn't prepared for. Nathan may have forged executive sign-offs, I said. And if he did that, this may not stop at fake vendors. It could go deeper: internal budgets, project funding, even severance padding. Grant blew out a long breath, eyes narrowing. You think someone helped him? I think no one manipulates company resources at that scale without help. Someone on the inside had to route these approvals, scrub the metadata, and keep the paper trail quiet. He leaned forward. Then we're not talking retaliation anymore. We're talking fraud. And I want to follow the thread, I said, but quietly. HR, not yet. I want a controlled audit. Someone airtight. Internal controls won't cut it. Too many compromised layers. We need a third-party forensic team. Grant nodded. I know someone. Quiet. Discreet. Good, I said. Start Monday. That night, I walked the building again. It felt different this time. Not like healing, but like a minefield. When I've been too focused on leadership dynamics to notice. Nathan wasn't just swinging at people. He may have been siphoning from the system while distracting the company with chaos. The next week, the forensic audit began in stealth. Systems access logs, financial movement trails, vendor registrations. By Wednesday, a name surfaced. Marla Winslow, senior finance analyst. On payroll 6 years. Clean record. Low profile. But in the audit, her credentials have been used to approve 2 of the suspect disbursements. Outside working hours via VPN. It didn't match her typical activity patterns. We brought her in for a closed-door chat. She was calm. Too calm. Marla, I asked gently, can you explain these authorizations? She didn't blink. I was instructed to expedite them. They came from Nathan's office. Time-sensitive approvals. Did you verify them with Grant or legal? I was told Grant had already signed off. That it was just a formality. By who? A pause. A glance toward the window. His assistant. Laurel. Now, that was a name I hadn't heard in a while. Laurel Green. Quiet. Efficient. The kind of person who knew where every body was buried because she made the schedule for the funeral. We terminated her position the next morning, quietly. IT pulled her hard drive. The audit team confirmed 3 vendor shell companies were routed through her access credentials, with Nathan's approvals piggybacked via admin proxy. It wasn't just sabotage, it was embezzlement. At least $312,000 over the last fiscal year. Nathan had been robbing us blind and using leadership chaos as cover. Grant sat in my office late that night, holding a glass of something amber and expensive. You want to take this public? He asked. No, I said. Not yet. First, we go legal. Quiet charges. Civil complaint. No press. And after that, then we go loud, because the people needed to know. The team needed to trust that their work, their futures, weren't built on rot. That someone was watching. That someone would hold the line. Nathan thought he was smarter than the system. But he forgot one thing. The system doesn't forgive the man who steals from the people who built it. And now, it was time for consequences. Justice doesn't always arrive in sirens. Sometimes, it comes in a sealed manila envelope. A quiet knock on an apartment door at 6:30 a.m. A process server in a gray jacket who asks calmly, "Are you Nathan Sloan?" By the end of that Tuesday, Nathan had been named in a civil fraud complaint filed by Virion Dynamics Incorporated, citing embezzlement, misuse of executive authority, and falsification of financial records. The board approved it unanimously. No objections. Not even a discussion. The audit had done its job. The forensic team tracked 3 separate shell companies, each registered to an address in Delaware and traced back to a holding firm created under Laurel Green's name, his assistant, his gatekeeper, and now his co-defendant. The scope of the fraud? $427,000 across 6 quarters, masked through strategic consulting, invoices, and routed through dormant budget lines. When the legal team presented the final report to me, it wasn't anger I felt. It was disappointment. Nathan had walked into a company built on grit and sweat and trust, and decided it was his personal ATM. I didn't want blood. I wanted the infection cut out. So I made a choice. We didn't issue a press release. No media circus. No public humiliation. We let the filing speak for itself. The message was clear. This company protects its people. This company defends its culture. This company fights back. But the board wasn't done with me. The next morning, Chairman Wallace called me into his office. He was holding a single document. He didn't slide it across the desk. He handed it to me directly. I glanced down. Offer of permanent appointment. Executive Director of Strategic Operations. Full voting rights. Direct report to Board of Directors. I didn't speak for a long moment. You earned this, Wallace said simply. And frankly, the company needs your kind of leadership now more than ever. I looked up. I don't want a corner office to protect. I want a structure to rebuild. Then do it, he said. Start wherever you want. So I did. But I didn't start with a memo. I started with a meeting. An open one. Town hall style. No slides. No buzzwords. Just people crowded into our biggest conference room with a live stream piped to every satellite office. I stood at the front in a plain black sweater, sleeves rolled. No blazer. No power tie. Just me. Most of you know what happened. I began. Or at least part of it. You've heard rumors. You've seen calendar changes. Some of you were hurt by it. Some of you lost good people, good teammates. And all of you had a right to wonder if leadership would ever be held accountable. I paused, scanning the faces, watching the shoulders drop, the arms unfold, the silence lean in. Well, I'm here to tell you, leadership just got a wake-up call. And it's never going back to sleep again. There was no applause, just the kind of stillness that means people are actually listening. I'm not going to pretend we're perfect now. We're not. But what we are, starting today, is transparent, accountable, and rebuilding together. I will answer questions. I will stay until the last hand is raised. And when we leave this room, we leave it with a new rule burned into the foundation of this company. I looked up and said it clearly. Integrity is not optional. That line, once etched into a nameplate, now belonged to everyone. For the next hour, people spoke freely. Engineers, accountants, interns, vets. They asked about hiring practices, whistleblower policies, career growth. I answered every question. And if I didn't know the answer, I wrote it down and promised to follow up. And I did. Everyone. Because a promise means nothing unless it's followed by action. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with Michelle to overhaul our executive accountability code. We created a leadership review panel, a rotating group of cross-department employees with the power to flag issues, audit decisions, and challenge C-suite conduct. We reinstated every employee Nathan had tried to silence, those who hadn't found jobs elsewhere. For those who had, I reached out personally, sometimes just to say, I'm sorry. You deserve better. I wasn't fixing everything, but I was building something better. The final step? We redirected the recovered funds from Nathan's fraud case into a new initiative, the Virion Rebuild Fund, designed to fund employee development, mental health resources, and innovation grant for projects proposed by anyone in the company. Because if you're going to take back what was stolen, give it back to the people who earned it. That Friday, I walked through the office one last time before the weekend. No suit, no entourage, just me. Someone from the analytics pod passed me in the hallway and said quietly, "It feels different now, like we matter again." I nodded, because they did. And the man who once tried to delete me, he was now just a file in a locked drawer. But me, I was still here, and I was just getting started. 3 months after we filed the civil suit against Nathan Sloan, Virion was operating like a company reborn. Morale was up. Attrition was down. The whisper networks had gone quiet, replaced by feedback loops and direct collaboration. For the first time in years, the office didn't feel like a place people tolerated. It felt like a place they believed in. And then the offer came. It arrived in a white envelope, hand-delivered by courier to my office at 8:30 a.m. on a Monday. Inside was a formal letter, embossed with the logo of Burlington Ashridge Partners, one of the top 5 private equity firms in the country. Their offer? $174 million for controlling interest in Virion Dynamics. Cash. Clean. Immediate. With performance-based bonuses, golden handcuffs for senior leadership, and a fast-track integration plan that would swallow us whole within 12 months. It was everything an investor dreams of, everything a shareholder might celebrate. And yet, I sat there staring at it like it was a ticking bomb, because I knew it came with offers like this. I'd seen it too many times in this industry. the promise of innovation, the facade of partnership. And then, slowly but surely, the soul gets drained out. They'd keep the name, maybe the building, but the people, the culture, the values, gone. Michelle walked into my office an hour later. She didn't wait for me to say anything. She saw the letter on my desk and just leaned on the edge of the table. "You knew they'd come," she said. "I did, and I don't trust them." She gave a small smile. "Then don't sell." "It's not that simple," I said. "The board could overrule me." "No," she replied, "they can't. You hold a controlling vote." That was the thing. I never used that vote to block profit. But this time, this was different. This wasn't just a business decision. This was an identity crisis. Later that afternoon, we held an executive meeting to discuss the offer. Grant Reynolds, the CFO, was cautiously optimistic. The board's East Coast investors were practically salivating. "This is legacy money," one of them said. "You could walk away tomorrow and never worry again." But when they turned to me, I didn't speak right away. I looked around the room. These weren't just colleagues. They were survivors. People who had rebuilt this company brick by brick after Nathan nearly burned it down. People who stayed, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. "I don't care about walking away," I said finally. "I care about what I'd be walking away from." They waited. "This isn't just about valuation," I continued. "It's about the kind of company we are, what we stand for. The next move we make defines who we are, not to Wall Street, but to ourselves." I paused. Let the silence stretch. Then I added, "I'm not here to sell Virion. I'm here to protect it." Michelle nodded slowly. Grant leaned back, thoughtful. One board member, Jonas Kelly, a veteran who rarely spoke, cleared his throat. "You're talking about adding a culture clause, aren't you?" I nodded. "A binding clause that prevents the company from being acquired unless new ownership agrees to preserve core leadership principles, employee protection standards, and internal ethics oversight. Non-negotiable. You'll never get a buyer to agree to that," another board member said. "Then we don't sell," I replied. The room was quiet again. This time, not with resistance, with respect. Later that week, I drafted the clause myself with Michelle's help. It was simple, elegant, brutal in its clarity. Virion Dynamics shall not be sold, merged, or otherwise consolidated unless the acquiring entity agrees in writing to preserve all current employee integrity protections, independent oversight by the Leadership Review Panel, guaranteed transparency in executive hiring/firing decisions, permanent inclusion of employee-led innovation initiatives. Any attempt to override these terms will trigger automatic buyback provisions to restore control to the original founder. That clause became known internally as the Wall Clause because it didn't just protect the company. It protected the heart of it. Burlington Ashridge read the clause, and they walked. 2 weeks later, a smaller firm, a values-based accelerator out of Chicago, approached us with a counteroffer. Less money, fewer zeros, but full alignment. We turned it down too, not because we didn't want partners, but because we weren't ready to hand the keys to someone else. Not yet. That Friday, I walked through the office like I always did. Quiet, unassuming. I passed by the whiteboard in the main common area, the one that employees use to scribble ideas or weekend plans. Someone had written in bold black marker, "We're not just a company anymore. We're standard." And beneath it, someone else had added, "And Daniel made sure we wouldn't forget that." I stood there for a moment, and I realized something. I hadn't just survived the fire. I had built a firewall. The first time I walked into Virion Dynamics, I was just a data engineer with a backpack and a resume printed at FedEx office. No one held the door. No one remembered my name. I sat in the back row, listened more than I spoke, and learned the system, every department, every line of code, every pressure point. I never planned to lead. I just wanted to build something that mattered. Now, 8 years later, I sat at the same desk. Only this time, the company bore my fingerprints. But it was time to think bigger. Not about growth, about succession. Because I'd spent the past year rebuilding a company. Now, I wanted to leave behind a blueprint for how to protect it. I called it the Legacy Code. Not a policy manual, not a mission statement, a living document, a set of unbreakable values written in the language of reality, not marketing. I didn't write alone. I invited people from every floor to contribute. From the front desk receptionist who'd been here since the beginning, to the 20-something programmer who just joined 2 months ago. Anonymous submissions, open forums, roundtable lunches. And what came out wasn't corporate speak. It was truth. Simple, clear, sharp. Line 1. Leadership is not a ladder. It's a weight. You lift it with humility or you collapse under ego. Line 2. Silence is not neutrality. It is compliance. Speak up. Speak early. Line 3. Power is loaned, never owned. Earn it daily. Line 4. Integrity is not optional. That line stuck. It had been on a nameplate once. Now it became our cornerstone. Over the next few months, I embedded the legacy code into everything. Hiring, onboarding, team reviews, executive evaluations. It became the lens through which we measured more than performance. We measured character. And something strange happened. Productivity went up. Turnover dropped. Applicants doubled. Referral rates spiked. We stopped chasing culture. We became it. But still, I wasn't done. Because I knew if I wanted this to last, I had to do the one thing every founder dreads. Step back. Not disappear. Just begin the handoff. I started mentoring 3 people directly. None of them traditional C-suite types. One was a UX designer. Another, a former project manager turned team lead. The third, an HR analyst who'd once sent me an anonymous message during the Nathan days. Thanks for fighting quietly. Now she was sitting at the decision table, helping shape company-wide policies. I gave them access, responsibility, most importantly, permission to question me. Because real succession isn't about cloning yourself. It's about making room. One morning, I passed by the break room where 2 of them were deep in conversation with a junior hire. They were whiteboarding a problem together, openly, animatedly, without hierarchy. No one even noticed I was standing there. That's when I knew it was working. Later that week, I took a walk with Michelle. We circled the office grounds, past the big mural wall where employees had begun painting their own symbols and quotes. She pointed at one section, recently painted in dark blue. At the center was a simple phrase. Don't be loud. Be clear. Decross. I laughed. I don't even remember saying that. She smiled. You didn't. One of your mints did. They said it's how they think of you. We kept walking. Quiet. Peaceful. Not because the battle was over, but because the torch was already moving. That night, I stayed in the office long after the lights dimmed. I looked around at the empty desks, the blinking monitors, the conference room where it had all gone down. I pulled out a fresh note card, and I wrote, if you ever find yourself in a room where someone tries to erase you, remember, you built the pen, you own the page, and the ink, it's your name. Write the ending yourself. Daniel Cross. I left the card in the back of the legacy code binder. No signature, just truth. If you've ever been underestimated, let this be your reminder. Quiet strength is still strength. Drop a comment if you've ever had to prove your worth the hard way. And don't forget to subscribe. Stories like this are just getting started.